Hey everyone, ready to dive into some seriously deep questions. I'm talking about the big one. Who am I?
It's a question that, seems simple enough on the surface, but as anyone who's glanced at understanding the self knows,
Mhm.
well, let's just say it's kept philosophers busy for quite a while.
It really has, and for good reason, right? I mean, I think about this stuff all the time, and I know I'm not alone. It's like we all want to figure out our place in the universe, don't we?
Absolutely. This whole search for self-understanding is a universal human experience.
Mm,
It's fascinating, really, how different cultures and historical periods have tackled this question.
for sure. And understanding the self really doesn't hold back, does it? It throws us right into the deep end.
It does, which is what makes it so great.
Mm.
We're talking about a text that explores the evolution of thought around the self, from the ancient Greeks to thinkers alive today.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning then with like the OG of self-reflection. Socrates, know thyself. That should be on a t-shirt.
Right. Such a simple statement, but man, so profound. Socrates was convinced that true wisdom starts with knowing yourself. He thought we should never stop questioning our beliefs and assumptions.
It's almost like he predicted the whole danger of echo chambers,
Yeah.
centuries before social media.
That's a great point. It's true, he really did encourage this kind of mindfulness, you could say, urging people to look inward instead of just blindly accepting things. I wonder, do you think you'd be into those meditation apps?
Who knows? Either way, it definitely makes you think. Like, when was the last time you sat down and actually asked yourself, what do I actually believe?
Exactly. And it goes even deeper than that, don't you think? It's not just what we believe, but why. And that's where Plato, Socrates' student, takes this whole idea of self-examination even further. He had this idea that the soul is made up of three parts: the appetitive, the spirited, and the rational.
Oh, yeah, I remember this from the text. It's like the appetitive part of me is all, give me that extra slice of pizza. But my spirited side is about discipline. And then there's the rational part, trying to be the voice of reason, trying to sort it all out.
That's a perfect example. And this whole idea of, this internal struggle, these different parts of ourselves battling for control, well, let's just say it's a recurring theme.
And so relatable, too, right? We've all been there. But how does this inner battle play into the bigger question of who am I?
For Plato, it was all about achieving this kind of inner harmony. He believed that when our rational side takes the reins, we're more likely to make choices that truly align with who we are. And that's what leads to a more fulfilling life.
It's interesting, this idea of the soul's journey towards deeper understanding pops up again later in the text, right? I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking about St. Augustine, a major figure in early Christianity, and he was also all about this journey.
Absolutely. And for Augustine, true self-knowledge went hand in hand with knowing God. So he saw the soul's journey as a path towards the divine.
So it seems like whether you're searching inward or looking for a connection to something greater, there's this shared idea of a journey, right? Which I kind of like. It's not about a quick answer, but about the ongoing process of figuring out who we are.
And it's a journey that takes us through centuries of thought, different cultures, moving into the age of reason. We start to see philosophers really grappling with this relationship between mind and body, between reason and experience.
Oh, for sure. And that brings us to who else? Rene Descartes. I think, therefore I am. Talk about a statement that stood the test of time.
It really has, hasn't it? Descartes was convinced that even the ability to doubt, to question your own existence, well, that's proof of the mind at work. It's where he made that distinction between the mind thinking I and the physical body.
Okay, so let's say I'm over here questioning everything I thought I knew about myself. Is that a good sign? Does that mean I'm on the right track with this whole self-discovery thing?
I'd say it definitely means you're using that part of yourself Descartes valued most. That questioning, thinking mind. Though, wouldn't be philosophy if everyone agreed with him completely, right?
And that's where John Locke comes in, right? With the whole
Oh.
blank slate theory.
Exactly. Locke was all about the idea that we're born without any innate knowledge. It's our experiences, he argued, that shape who we become. He called it the tabula rasa.
So instead of showing up with a preloaded operating system, we're constantly downloading new software through experiences, relationships, knowledge, and that shapes how we function.
Now that is a fantastic analogy. Really drives home Locke's emphasis on nurture over nature. And it makes you wonder, what are some of the experiences that have most profoundly shaped your sense of self?
Whoa. Okay, that's a question I'll be pondering for a while. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, we can't forget about David Hume, the master of questioning everything. Did he even buy this whole idea that there is a consistent me to be discovered?
Hume really threw a wrench into things, didn't he? He was adamant that we're not some fixed, unchanging self, but more like this ever-evolving bundle of perceptions, sensations, emotions, always in flux.
So less about finding one true self, more about acknowledging that we're always changing and adapting to what life throws at us.
You got it. And it actually circles back to what we were talking about earlier about the journey of self-discovery being ongoing. But let's shift gears a bit, jump ahead to the modern era, where we meet a thinker who really tried to bridge this gap between reason and experience, Immanuel Kant.
Ugh, Kant. Gotta admit, his work can be a bit, well, dense at times. But this whole concept of transcendental apperception, pretty wild once you wrap your head around it.
Definitely a mouthful.
Mm.
But at its heart, Kant believed that our minds aren't just passively absorbing information like some kind of blank slate.
Mm.
We're actively organizing and interpreting our experiences, shaping them into a cohesive understanding of the world and, in turn, ourselves.
Okay, so it's less downloading information and more like we're actively making meaning from it all.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like we're directing our own mental movies.
Yeah.
Right? Taking all that raw footage of our experiences and editing it into a narrative that makes sense to us.
Love that. But if we're the directors, who's writing the script? Are we even aware of all the things influencing our choices, our behavior?
Now that is the million-dollar question. And it leads us directly to the work of Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis.
Right, the unconscious mind. It's like Freud found this hidden room in the house of who am I that no one even knew existed.
He really did. Freud's argument was that our thoughts, our feelings, even our actions, they're all deeply influenced by unconscious drives and desires, things bubbling beneath the surface, especially those rooted in the id, ego, and superego.
Quick recap. The id is all about those primal urges. The superego is that internalized voice of rules and expectations. And the ego, well, the ego's stuck in the middle trying to keep everyone happy.
Exactly. And for Freud, understanding ourselves means becoming aware of these unconscious forces and how they might be pulling the strings.
So even when we think we're making a conscious choice, there might be a whole lot more going on that we're not even aware of. Well, it's fascinating, a little creepy, to be honest.
For sure. Definitely adds another layer to who am I? But what if, instead of digging into the depths of the unconscious, we focused on something a bit more tangible, something we do, our actions?
You're talking about Gilbert Ryle, right? I act, therefore I am. That was his whole thing, wasn't it?
You got it. Ryle believed that we don't have to go on some big internal excavation project to find our true selves. Our actions, those choices we make, well, that's the most authentic expression of who we are.
Okay, so less time analyzing our every thought and feeling, more time paying attention to how we move through the world, those everyday choices, big or small.
Precisely. And this whole idea of actions speaking louder than words, it really resonates with certain aspects of Filipino philosophy, which we're going to get into a bit later. But first, let's consider another fascinating perspective, this one from the world of neuroscience. The view that the self is essentially reducible to the brain.
You're talking about Paul Churchland, the philosopher who's basically like, the self, it's all just neurons firing, folks.
It's the one. Churchland was convinced that with enough advances in neuroscience, we'd be able to fully understand consciousness and the self just in terms of brain activity.
So no need for any mystical soul searching. It's all about the physical stuff happening in our heads.
That might be simplifying Churchland's argument a tad, but you're getting the general idea.
It's definitely a different way of thinking about it. But even if our brains are like the hardware, don't our experiences still shape who we are?
Now that's a point that Maurice Merleau-Ponty, a philosopher who really emphasized the importance of the body, would completely agree with.
Right. He talked about how our bodies aren't just these containers for our minds. We actually experience the world through our bodies.
Yeah.
And that shapes how we understand ourselves.
Exactly. Merleau-Ponty argued that our physical experiences, how we move, how we interact with our environment, are inseparable from our sense of self.
So we've got our minds, our experiences, our physical selves, our actions. It's like all these puzzle pieces coming together to form, well, us.
And remember how we were discussing earlier how that journey of self-discovery is universal, but also shaped by our cultures? Well, it's time to bring in that unique perspective offered in the text. Asking the Filipino, who are you?
Yes, that section is powerful. It asks these really direct questions like, Ako ay buhay humihinga, I am alive, I breathe, and Ako ay hindi ika, I am not you.
Those statements are incredible, aren't they? So simple, yet so profound. They get at both our shared humanity and our individual uniqueness.
And it's not just about recognizing those things passively either. There's this call to action in the text, an emphasis on the importance of magpakatao truly acting human.
And that's a concept that goes deep within Filipino culture, this idea of living authentically, ethically, in a way that honors both our individual selves and our connections to others.
So it's about more than just existing, right? It's about truly being. But how does this idea of magpakatao fit in with all the different philosophical perspectives we've been talking about? Does it offer some kind of like unifying thread?
You know, it's interesting you say that because I think Magpakatao really does touch on so many of the ideas we've been kicking around.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking about self-knowledge, the role of our experiences, the power of choices. It feels like all of these things feed into how we act human, how we live out that idea.
So it's not just about figuring out who we are when we're by ourselves, but how that understanding then shapes how we choose to be in the world, how we treat other people.
That's it. And the text really drives home this point that, sure, being born human, that's the easy part. The real work, the lifelong journey, is in like embodying the qualities that make us truly human. It's about living up to our potential.
Makes you think about all these different philosophers, right? Socrates with his whole self-reflection thing, that's definitely a part of Magpakatao. But it's not just about looking inward, is it?
Right, and that's where someone like Ryle comes in. Remember, he's all about the importance of actions, how they reflect who we are. So when we connect that with this concept of Magpakatao, well, it's not enough to just think about being a good person. We actually have to, do good. Make those choices that actually line up with what we believe.
It's like that Gandhi quote, be the change. But, and this is something I struggle with, it's not always easy, is it?
No, not at all.
I mean, we're talking about all these different forces, internal, external, that influence our choices. Like Freud talked about those unconscious drives, right? And then there are societal expectations that shape our superego. It's a lot.
It really is. But the way I see it, the text seems to be saying that, hey, wrestling with those challenges, pushing ourselves to make ethical choices, even when it's tough, well, maybe that's all part of what it means to act human.
It also makes me think about how the Filipino perspective adds this whole other layer to our earlier conversation about culture shaping the self. Our background, our upbringing, the values we're surrounded by, it all plays a role in how we define Magpakatao for ourselves.
Right. Absolutely. And it's a good reminder that there are so many ways to approach this idea of the self. You've got this long Western philosophical tradition with its emphasis on individual consciousness, reason. And then you have these rich perspectives from other cultures like the Philippines that emphasize things like community, ethical action, this idea of interconnectedness.
It's almost like, I don't know, a tapestry with all these different threads woven together.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And just like with a tapestry, the more perspectives we can weave into our understanding of the self, well, the more intricate, the more interesting that picture becomes, right?
I like that. So after this incredible deep dive, all these different ideas, centuries of thought, where does it leave us? I mean, do we even have an answer to the question, who am I?
If there's one thing we've learned, it's that there's no single answer, no magic formula. But we can embrace the journey, the exploration of it all.
It all circles back, doesn't it? It's about the process, that constant evolution, the choices we make along the way.
Exactly. And as we've seen, there's so many different paths we can take from introspection and, really looking inward to understanding the influence of our experiences, our cultures, even our own biology.
So much to think about. So for you, our listener, if you had to take everything we've explored and boil it down to one core principle for understanding yourself, what would it be? What really stuck with you?
I love that question. And I hope you keep asking it, even after this deep dive is over. Because in the end, the most important answers to the question, who am I, are the ones we discover for ourselves.